Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Swami Rajeshwarananda. Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi was the personification of emancipation, the source of supreme peace, and the boundless ocean of freedom. He was indeed the riddle of all life on earth. His solemn presence lifted us beyond our body and mind to our true self. This truth of self-realization in his holy presence was as if coursing through our veins, pulsating in our bosom, tingling with every drop of blood, and becoming consonant with our very heartbeats. His words make us even today rest on the glory of ourself, the infinite, the eternal, and the deathless. His silent and sacred look imparted self-knowledge that became a part and parcel of our constitution and the very vitality of our life. Bhagwan Sri Ramana was the ideal of the human race. He was the wonder of the world with the perfume of spiritual peace. He was the secret of many masterminds. His life is a study in divine illumination based on dynamic silence. All worries and wounds of the world simply melted in his presence like ice before fire. His was a discovery of lost technique in divine awareness, a gift to humanity. He touches life at all levels. No school of philosophy, cult, creed, yoga, and the like could claim him as he did, not fit easily into any ready-made classification. He lived free and remained free, and let everyone remain free likewise. A sage, a philosopher, recluse, an incarnation of God. All these terms do not adequately describe him. All these fall flat since he transcends them. He was not the present-day product of some past tradition. No guru or shastras made him great or illumined him. He was unique in remaining true to himself and being himself. His traditional knowledge in shastras, scriptures, and bhashyas came to him after his self-realization. He was in himself the quest and the find. He set before us as the glory and goal of life, the realization of the full divine consciousness of ourself. The self is not something to be created or attained, but which is fully aware of itself, with an awareness that can neither begin nor end, as it is eternal. He proclaimed the Absolute as the Self. I am in each individual life, ever being itself. Such a realization endows everyone ultimately with pure consciousness, a state of impersonality, timelessness, spacelessness, causelessness, freedom, and peace. He was himself a testimony for such an august revelation that always stands at the very doorstep of one and all. Thus the heart of our being is the heart of the universe. It is there that illusions and dreams, confusions and contradictions take to flight, and illumination floods in with the kindly light in one's life, be the individual black or brown, white or yellow. His was the cure-all that restores the human race to its lost heritage and happiness, bereft of social, political, and economical diseases of the present day, together with their 101 ghosts. The remedy for all such troubles that divide man from man, class from class, nation from nation, and that spring up like weeds into new growths, lies in awakening the spiritual consciousness of their nature, which unites them. No society or country can endure without a spiritual basis, a moral basis, a recognition of the value of fellowship, brotherhood, and neighborhood. Such a sublime atmosphere of the higher life ends all troubles, frictions, hatreds, and discords automatically. In the realm of divinity are indeed the unseen forces that are the real sources of power, peace, and plenty. Sri Ramanna kindles in every one of us an awareness of the spiritual glory within. Bhagwan's gospel is a practical expression of the self, the reality, intelligence, and bliss. It cannot be delimited by determinations and differentiations. It is not objective and visionary to result in skepticism and agnosticism. It is not a datum of sense to result in materialism and naturalism. It is not a stream of ideas to result in subjectivism and solipsism. It is not nihilism, ecosmism, fatalism, anthropomorphism, Manichaeism, and the like. It is not idealism or realism, optimism or pessimism, nor is it an amalgam of schisms. Reality is not existent, but existence. It is not consciousness of, but consciousness as subjective substance. Objects bring in distinction in the empirical knowledge and are not applicable to the distinctionless, non-dual absolute, the self. Bhagwan Sri Ramanna stands for the unity of existence, the non-duality of the Godhead, and the harmony of religions. He expresses selfhood, including and transcending the brotherhood of man and fatherhood of God in the family of humanity. He shines as the sun of wisdom in the firmament of the self, radiating serenity, sublimity, and solemnity. His teachings are refreshingly plain and powerful. They throw open the floodgates of the soul and make the living waters of the highest consciousness rush forth. His gospel, free from any dogma or doctrine, is not hampered by fossilized traditions. It is as broad as the sky, as deep as the sea, and as universal as the rays of the sun. He awakens in every one of us the dormant divinity, the potential power, the primary principle, which is at the back of the flow and flicker of finite phenomena. His life is a practical demonstration of the reality of Brahman, the Supreme Self, and the insubstantiality of the phenomenal world. His gospel reveals clearly the divinity of the soul, the oneness of humanity, and the indivisibility of the Godhead, not as articles of belief or opinion, cult or creed, dogmas or doctrine, but as the truths of his own experience. To know Bhagavan is to be Bhagavan himself, because knowing is being, and being is knowing. Even a single word from Bhagavan's holy lips was enough to enable us to carry it all through our life, to stir the soul and awaken it to its intrinsic immortality and infinity, whereas splendid orations from persons without divine wisdom, shouted from platforms, fall flat on our ears and fail to bring about any effect at all. Bhagavan's sacred and solid silence spoke louder than words at times, and his solemn and sublime look was vividly significant at all times. It is the greatest privilege of the writer that he has been blessed with the rare opportunity of having been in contact with Bhagavan Sri Ramanna for 46 years and more. He has also had several occasions of prolonged and continuous stay at Bhagavan's lotus feet for months together. He feels from the bottom of his heart highly fortunate to claim that he is mere dust of the holy feet of our beloved Bhagwan. Tiruchuli, the birthplace of Sri Ramanna. N. Rajan. Tiruchuli has been an important place of pilgrimage, kshetra, since ancient times. The temple is noted for its antiquity and held in deep veneration. This place has become hallowed further by being the birthplace of Bhagavan Sri Ramanna Maharishi. It was here, in 1879, that the celestial child Venkataraman was born as the son of Sri Sundaram Iyer and his devout wife Srimati Algamal. Sri Sundaram Iyer was an orthodox Brahmin of rare qualities and was working as a pleader, that is, a country lawyer. His wife was equally pious and extremely generous. Sri Venkataraman was the second son in a family of 3 sons and 1 daughter. Tiruchuli is a small town and administrative center, taluk, in Ramanathapuram district in South India. It is about 38 miles from the large city of Madurai and can be reached either by bus or car from there. It has recently been connected with the railway line running from Manamadurai to Virudhunagar. Legend has it that the town was named Tiruchuli because Lord Shiva protected it from being submerged by making circular holes, chutsi, in the land to serve as outlets for water to be drained out. When the whole world was inundated during the Pralay, the Great Deluge. The temple is well built in the style laid down by Hindu tradition and many centuries old. There are 2 separate shrines for the god and the goddess, and each is provided with an imposing tower. The inscriptions on the stones by the then Tamil rulers are still seen on the walls adjoining the sanctum sanctorum of both god and goddess. This hoary temple was renovated and consecrated last in 1957 by the munificence of Sri Subramaniam Chettiar. The annual Adipuram festival is celebrated there regularly during the month of Adi, July-August. The presiding deity is Sri Bhuminath and his consort is Sri Sahayavalli. Scriptures are replete with a description of the greatness of this place, as may be evident even from the various names given to the place as well as the deities. The place is called Tiruchuziyal, Punaivanam, Avarthapuram, Trisulapuram, Kalishwaram, Bhuvaneshwaram, etc. The Lord is called Bhuminathar, Bhumisar, Tirumeninathar, Bhuvanesar, Chushikesar, etc. The goddess is called Sahayavalli, Tunaimalai Ammam, Muthumalai Umayal, etc. Tiruchuli was visited by ancient Tamil saints famous for their devotion: Sri Appar, Sri Sundarar, Sri Manikchavakshagar, and Sri Sambandar. They spontaneously poured forth beautiful classic Tamil songs in this temple in praise of the Lord and his consort. It is declared that there are 9 sacred waters surrounding this temple: Sulatirtham, Papaharini, Kanvatirtham, Kalavatirtham, Koditirtham, Bhumitirtham, Amrithavavi, Brahmatirtham, and Trilochana Tirtham. Sri Bhuminath is in the form of a lingam symbolizing Shiva, and it is said that he is worshipped here even by the celestials who are specially attracted by the place. The Lord confers considerable prosperity on those who visit this place purging their sins and removing their miseries, besides granting them health, wealth, and offspring. The return for any religious ceremonies, gifts, worship, and sacrifices, yajna, done at this particular place increases 1,000-fold. Such acts shower merit, punya, in abundance on individuals who perform them here. This place is compared to Kasi, Banaras, for its sanctity. All those who end their life here are said to attain liberation, set free from the cycle of births and deaths. Brihatpala, one of the Pandya kings of the lunar dynasty, was absolved from his sin of killing a Brahmin simply by entering this town while seeking refuge. The sacred river Kondinya, which is named after sage Kondinya, runs by the eastern side of the temple, flowing north to south, Dakshina Vahini. It is said that the holy river Ganges were specially brought here in the form of Kondinya by Lord Shiva, as a boon in recognition of the austere penance performed by the sage. The merit derived from a dip in this river is immeasurable. There is a holy tank in front of the temple. It is called Trisula Tirtham, as it was created by Lord Shiva by a mere stroke of his weapon, the Trisul. This is held highly sacred as a bath, and it washes away sins without leaving a trace. Indeed, it is said that the goddess Ganges bathes in this tank every year on the full moon day of the month of Masi, February, March, and worships the Lord there. Even now it can be seen that during the waxing fortnight of the moon, just prior to this full moon, the water in the tank rises gradually, reaching the maximum on the full moon day, after which it decreases gradually during the waning fortnight, to reach its previous level on the succeeding new moon day. Bhagavan Sri Ramanna also often mentioned the greatness of this tank and spoke of this phenomena. If any of the devotees happened to go to Tiruchuli at this time of year, he would ask them specially to witness the changing level of the tank. The house in Kartigai Street in Tiruchuli, in which the child Venkataraman was born, has been acquired by Sri Ramanashramam and is called Sundara Mandiram. Daily pujas are performed here for Bhagavan. It may also be mentioned that the house at Madurai, where the boy Venkataraman was brought up during his school days and where he had the supreme experience of self-realization, has been secured by Sri Ramanashramam. It is situated in Chokappa Naikar Street and is called Sri Ramanna Mandiram. Here also daily pujas are performed for Bhagavan. Sri Ramanna Maharshi 1. Ramavarma Appan Tampuran. The author, a member of the royal family of Cochin, who came to Sri Bhagavan sometime in the mid-30s, was a reputed writer in Malayalam, deeply read in the Upanishads. During his visit to Sri Bhagavan, he sat in unbroken meditation for hours with such intensity that he missed his meal for the day. The visit naturally had a profound effect on him, and he had the highest reverence for Sri Bhagavan. When Sri Appuni, the Malayalam biographer of Sri Bhagavan, approached him for an introduction to his book sometime later, Sri Tampuran wrote this essay. It was highly commended by Sri Bhagavan himself and has been translated into several languages. We are pleased to give below excerpts from this essay. There is no limit to the surging rise or to the subsiding tranquility of the mind, nor is there any limit to its powers to chastise or control and to confer a blessing. It is indeed the cause of both happiness and misery, of enjoyment and of liberation. If we understand the original and changing states of the mind, we are able to know the real nature of the illusory dream of the so-called waking state which deludes us. If we recognize that samsara is nothing but a work of the mind, then the mystery of the cycle of births and deaths of the soul is revealed. It is this essential nature of the mind that has been conclusively established by hundreds of authoritarian texts, the truth whereof can be grasped only by experience. There is no one who does not desire to eradicate misery and attain happiness, nor is there anyone who does not strive to this end. Nor are the metaphysicians who investigate the active and passive states of the mind scarce, but they are rare indeed who know that the search for the truth about the mind has to be made within oneself and not in others, and that happiness and misery are of one's own making. Few are those who inquire after the truth about the self. Fewer still are the self-realized. Hardly one among the siddhas who strive ever understands me aright. Thus said Lord Krishna, and it is certainly so. The path to self-realization is not easily accessible, and it is extremely difficult to tread. It is quite possible that even the siddhas who have achieved great powers might not have realized the truth. So then, whom would it not benefit to laud the saint who has realized it? Such self-realization dawned all at once for the Maharishi. The light of the self shone forth suddenly, like a flash of lightning, when it was time for karma to fulfill itself. The meritorious past made the ripe fruit of inquiry into the truth, which was latent in him, easily accessible. The casual hearing of the holy name of Sri Arunachaleshwara and the subsequent conscious experience of the state of death were merely the immediate and effective cause, purely incidental, a slender contrivance to release the flood of inner light. For him, there was no need of any discipline, nor had he the pain and anguish of the journey to reach the center of pure being from the rim of the wheel of samsara. The Supreme Lord of the universe lifted him up with his sacred hand and established him at the very center and source of being, awareness, bliss. Then, as he opened his eyes, the world was seen resplendent with light supreme. Life in solitude, non-attachment to society, abidance in the self, direct perception of the truth, and such other signs of enlightenment became handmaids to the pure soul who in a trice had attained eternal liberation. Let the tempest rage, the ocean rise up, or the earth quake, the tree of knowledge rooted on Arunachala stands immutable. Many pilgrims on life's journey repose in its shade, and countless devotees, like birds, pour forth their songs from its branches. This is indeed the kingdom of bliss. The aim is one, but many are the angles of vision. The goal is one, but many are the steps leading thereto. The eyes that may mark the aim have no sight, and the ways are dark. The paths trodden by great men are not easily known, and they are diverse. It is arduous and difficult to regulate one's life conscientiously, after examining and finding out what is happiness and what is misery, what is dharma and what is adharma, what is karma and what is akarma. It is next to impossible for ordinary people to proceed one step without getting entangled in the meshes of illusion. The physical body is heir to disease, fickle as the mind, and the intellect, finite in its scope. It is truly said, that which in the beginning looks like poison is found at the end to be nectar. No need to wonder that the one reality is seen as the many and diverse aspects. The Maharshi had only to look below with sympathy, never to look above and pine. It is perhaps on account of this that we find in much of the teachings of the Maharishi ultimate knowledge revealed rather than the path leading to it, giving preeminence to the end rather than to the means. Desire and dispassion are indeed poles apart. And how can liberation come from bondage? They are fit to receive his instruction who, with faith and devotion, earnestly seek truth and ardently aspire for liberation. Save through one's own experience, self-knowledge can never be achieved and realized through scholarship. The sorrows of the distressed who surrender themselves to him, the doubts of earnest seekers, the disbelief of the skeptics who come in to test him, and even the pride of the high and mighty, verily perish in the mere presence of the Maharishi. His sacred abode confers peace, and even induces spiritual trance, which yields the bliss of self-realization. The divine power of Dakshinamurti, the embodiment of knowledge, working through the inner being of the Maharishi, is within the ken and experience of such insignificant devotees as myself. Who, then, would not long to taste the nectar of the story of such a hallowed one? The praise of Maharishi is delightful and beneficent both to the worldly minded, sunk in the whirlpool of egotistic attachment and wallowing in the ditch of blind infatuation, and to those who seek liberation and to the liberated. It is indeed our good fortune to live during the lifetime of such a great sage. Blessed are the devotees who spend their time in his presence. The life of Maharishi, who has attained liberation, is not the biography of an individual, but the radiance of the universal self. Not the expression of a body's acts, but the manifestation of the spirit within. Sri Ramanna Maharshi. 2. Vedanta Kesari. Sri Ramanna Maharshi was a power, a beauty, a solace, and a marvel. He was one of the simplest souls that ever walked on earth, and withal one of the wisest. What was the secret of his power? A simple, open secret. He knew who he was. With this one key, he could unlock the secret doors of all problems. Being established in the self, he lived in this world like a born sovereign of spirit who is never ruled. Such is the grandeur of the knower of the self. Strictly speaking, only a knower of the self can be said to be truly independent. He alone has the Swarajya. It is open to all to attain this power. But those who have active faith in this truth are alone fit to effectively revere Sri Ramanna. He became the self, the source of all beauty. In him there was nothing that was not beautiful, for he had become purity itself. The grace that radiated through him made the world around him gracious. Many have been imparted solace in his presence. This has been a fact of experience. How was it so? He did not even perhaps talk. He had gone beyond all miseries that the flesh is heir to, and thus had become an embodiment of bliss itself. All who flocked there to lean against him got soothed in his coolness. This man, sitting unmoved at the feet of mighty Arunachala, was indeed a marvel. This frantic world uttered wild cries around him, but he remained still, his ears attuned to the music of the soul. Thus, in the fullness of time, he became a silent mystic music heard in the depths of their hearts by those who came to him. Was it a mere transient treasure that we had in him? Are all lost now but a painful haunting memory? No. Know yourself, and you will know that Sri Ramanna is yourself synonymous with self-realization. As long as people continue to keep themselves open to the stimulating influence of the saint lives on. Sri Ramanna Maharshi. 3. G.V. Subbaramaya. The salient facts of Bhagavan Sri Ramanna's life must be fairly familiar to readers. The boyhood thrill at the first casual mention of Arunachala, the death-like experience at Madurai, that sundered once and for all the bonds of connection with the body, renunciation of home and his union with Arunachala, the silent absorption for long in the bliss of the true self, the later resumption of external activity in response to the entreaty of devotees, his residence in Virupaksha cave, Skandashramam, Sri Ramanashramam, his attracting spiritual aspirants from all quarters of the earth in ever-increasing numbers, his granting of moksha to his mother, and the installation of the deity Matrubhuteshwara in the ashramam shrine, his last illness from cancer, and the Mahanirvana in the spring of 1950, when a brilliant star crossed the sky up to the peak of Arunachala. These are the outstanding events in the biblical span of Sri Bhagavan's blessed life on earth. We should, however, guard against certain misconceptions. The death-like experience in his Madurai home at the age of 17 transformed Sri Ramanna completely. He was no longer Venkataraman, the individual. That very moment he realized and became one with the Supreme Self. As Sri Bhagavan himself has stated more than once, there was absolutely no change in him afterwards. He remained ever the same, above name and form. It is to satisfy us that he says that whatever subsequently happened to his body was the work of divine Shakti that brought him from Madurai to Tiruvannamalai, took him first up the hill and then down to Ramanashramam, and drew to him innumerable devotees. In all that he did after the experience, he had no will of his own. It was the divine Shakti that functioned through him to fulfill its own purpose. Even when miraculous deeds were attributed to him, he warned us that he was merely the witness and that the rest was all the gracious doing of divine Shakti. There prevails an erroneous notion that after coming to Tiruvannamalai, Sri Bhagavan observed Maunavratam, vow of silence, performed several penance, tapas, by subjecting his body to various forms of physical torture, and thus gradually perfected himself and became a Siddha Purush. Sri Bhagavan himself expressly disavowed it. He said that he could not do any sadhana because he had no will of his own, nor was there any need for him to do it, because he had nothing to achieve thereby. He declared that he merely sat with closed eyes and in silence because there was then no urge in him to look out and speak, and that since his stay in the mango grove, he opened his eyes, spoke, and did whatever work came to his hand without any initiative or sankalp, will, on his part. There was absolutely no other change in him. His individual life's purpose had been fulfilled with his death-like experience, which lifted him above the plane of relativity. The scriptural injunctions and inhibitions did not concern him at all thereafter. From the age of 17, Sri Bhagavan was a Siddha Purush, Jivan Mukt, Sthita Pratnya, Gunatita, Atyashrami, all along. There was no question of evolution or gradual improvement in him. He was perfection itself. There are also those who wonder why a Mahatma like Sri Ramanna should suffer illness, and especially the terrible disease of cancer. Even a person of ordinary virtue is expected to have a happy life, an easy demise. Does not the instance of Sri Ramanna tend to undermine the common faith in the efficacy of self-realization to confer happiness? They ask. These inquirers must remember that another great sage of modern times, Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans, was also fatally afflicted with cancer of the throat. The explanation is simple. The Jnani, in his own view, has no body, no sankalp, no sense of doership. Indeed, he is all in all, and there is nothing other than himself. But we, the unredeemed, cannot help identifying the Jnani with his seeming body and individuality. So, to satisfy us, even the Jnani has to descend to our level and say that a body must spin out its prarabdha, destiny, which is paramount. Even the Jnani's body is not immune to disease and suffering. But the Jnani, being completely detached, is not in the least affected by whatever happens to the body. This was very well illustrated in the case of Sri Bhagavan himself, who looked radiantly cheerful in spite of the lacerating pain, the living crucifixion from that fell disease. So we must conclude that spiritual perfection has nothing to do with bodily ailments. The thousands ills which flesh is heir to can never touch the spirit. Far from undermining our faith in the efficacy of spiritual emancipation, this should encourage us to go ahead with our spiritual sadhana unmindful of all physical troubles. Lastly, if any further proof is required of the spirit's transcendence over the body, it is furnished by the celestial phenomena at the time of Sri Bhagavan's Mahanirvana. It was not merely an instance of the heavens themselves blazing forth the death of princely souls. It was a striking demonstration of divine Shakti to convince all who had eyes to see that Sri Bhagavan was the supreme soul and not the body with which we had identified him. It was, in short, the blazing forth of the transcendent divine glory. That was Bhagwan Sri Ramanna. Sri Ramanna Maharshi. 4. C.V. Subramanya Iyer. Once 4 ladies came to Sri Ramanna Ashramam to have darshan of Sri Ramanna. They belonged to different nationalities. One was an American, one an Italian, one French, and the fourth an Indian Christian. They sat in the prayer hall near the southern wall right in front of Bhagwan after duly paying their respects to him. The American lady began conversation, putting questions to him and getting answers which were interpreted by a devotee in the hall. In the end, the American lady asked Bhagwan, "Can we have your grace for our spiritual development?" Bhagwan replied, "If you had not the grace, you would not have thought of coming here." What an encouraging reply! No one who came to his presence ever went away discouraged. To an earnest inquirer, he would always say, "You are already that. Only the veil of ignorance has to be removed." Swami Vivekananda used to tell his followers, "Don't believe the self-possessed teacher who says, 'I see, but you cannot see.'" Bhagwan never observed any secrecy with regard to his teachings. His attitude was always encouraging. he would say, "You are always real. You're not going to realize anything new. Your effort must be directed towards removing the veil of ignorance by inquiry." Now, to return to the visitors, the American lady said, "Bhagwan, I am going back to America. Will you come there?" Bhagwan, with a smile on his face and in a tone expressing certainty, replied, "I am already there. I am above time and space." A little spark of the divine effulgence of Arunachala illumined Ramanna's heart even when he was a tender boy, as he himself admits in his poems, and since then he was seized with the thought of Arunachala. Lord Arunachala chose Ramanna as the fitting vehicle through which he could manifest himself. The blessed Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4:7, "Whenever there is decay of righteousness, O Bharata, and there is exaltation of unrighteousness, I myself come forth." Thus, out of compassion for humanity suffering from the diseases of samsara, or birth and death, Lord Arunachala chose to manifest himself as Ramanna. Accordingly, without any effort on his part and purely through divine will, Ramanna had the unique experience whereby he understood clearly that the body is separate from the undying self. In all his subsequent activities, Ramanna was merely an instrument in the hands of an unseen power, which was no other than Lord Arunachala himself. Ramanna wrote a letter before leaving home to his brother, wherein he conferred to the call from his father. The call divine, which happily has now become the appropriate title of the journal, attempts to spread the gospel of Ramanna throughout the world. Ramanna came to Tiruvannamalai and surrendered himself completely to Lord Arunachala. He lost his separate individuality and realized that he was the one self, Lord Arunachala himself. When Bhagavan was once asked by a devotee why he regarded Arunachala as his father, he gave no reply, but just smiled. The disciple then suggested that perhaps it might be for the benefit of others. Bhagavan said, "Yes, so long as there is the feeling. If it must have a source from which it came." Bhagavan now realized his identity with Arunachala. Then he sat in the temple silently, like Dakshinamurti. It is a mistake to suppose that he performed severe austerities. To all appearances, he was doing hard tapas. But he had already reached the goal without any effort on his part. There was no need for him to perform tapas. He sat silently and without any effort, for his real nature was maunam or tapas. Ramanna sat on the hill communicating by silence the call divine to all the people of the world. An Australian in search of truth. Mrs. Edith Mason. Why should an Australian come all the way across the Southern and Indian Oceans to search a spot almost unheard of by the outer world for the true facts regarding the life of an Indian saint? Has not Christianity produced saints in plenty? And why must one come here to study the teachings of one particular Hindu who is not even now in his body? The answer is this. The saint who lived here for over 50 years, known as Bhagavan Sri Ramanna Maharishi, is undoubtedly a perfect revelation of God, or the Self, as he named the source of the universe. It is a revelation such as is given to the world only a few times in its history, and Jesus Christ and Buddha were similar revelations. It is said that when the American President Wilson's daughter came to Bombay, she asked to be directed to Arunachala. She arrived in due course and found many visitors sitting in the hall in Bhagwan's presence. A spot was found for her on the floor, but no one took any special notice of this new visitor. She was just another European. She stayed only one night and no one saw her off to the station, for no one knew who she was. But on her return to America, she wrote articles for the newspapers and said that she now understood the teachings of the Gospels of Jesus and now knew what he had looked like. And this is precisely what I too have found. For me as well, the truths which Jesus taught have become living truth. Come unto me, all ye that are weary and heavy laden. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. For I am meek and lowly of heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. In what way is this different from the teaching of Bhagwan Maharishi, who says, surrender to me and cast your burden on the Lord, and my grace will do the rest? And ye shall find rest unto your souls. What can these words of Jesus mean but release from birth and death, and immortality as unity with the self? If one goes through the Gospels phrase by phrase and compares them with the feelings of Maharishi, one can see the utter clarity of Bhagwan's teachings, which leave no room for doubt or confusion as to their true meaning. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Bhagwan said, search within you for the true self. But when Jesus came to this earth, only a few devoted souls recognized him as the Son of God. Even among his disciples were some who misunderstood what his true aims were. The world shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. The Christ knew the real, as did the being we call the Maharishi. To have lived in proximity to him and to have seen him in the flesh, or even now, to be called to worship at the place where he lived, is sufficient grace to keep one humble for the rest of one's life. Once when Jesus was preaching on the side of the road near Jerusalem, the crowd pressing closely around him, one of the Marys, the sister of Martha, was also there. She loved and worshipped him with a great devotion, and listening, hung on his every word. Her eyes could not leave his face. The world was forgotten in the intensity of her concentration. He was saying, love your enemies, and do good to those that hate you and despitefully use you. His eyes shone with the light of the inner knowledge of truth, and with the radiance of divine love. Tears were streaming down Mary's face, and in her heart she was saying with all the force of her will, Lord, I will. Such was the power of the Christ, and also such the effect of the presence of the being we call the Bhagwan Maharishi. To doubt the truth of his words is unthinkable, for he spoke from conscious experience of the self. He is that self, and those who contact that spirit and bow in reverence and adoration of the glorious light which he radiates are constrained to heed the divine call and to say with Mary, Lord, I will. Ramana, Satguru, 1. GLN. Sri Bhagwan has said of Arunachala in his Badikam, my Lord, when anyone asks me to speak of your greatness, you hold me motionless like a statue with bowed head. Similarly do I find that my mind becomes numb when I write about Bhagwan Sri Ramana. Who is Arunachala Ramana? He himself gave the answer when he wrote, in the recess of the lotus heart of all, from Vishnu downwards, There shines this pure consciousness, the Paramatman, who is the same as Arunachala or Ramana. Sri Bhagavan was gracious enough to refer to this once when I was taking leave of him to return to my native place. He said, "Have you seen this morning's mail? Someone has written that Arunachala Ramana is everywhere, so that whenever he has an urge to come here, that feeling makes him postpone his visit." Humbly, I replied, expressing my own point of view, which was quite different from that expressed in the letter. "Bhagavan, in this body I have realized you in your divine form as my Guru, my Bhagavan. Once having seen you, neither I nor any other person can shake off the feeling of love for your divine form." At that time, I was attending to the ashram correspondence. I drafted a reply to the letter in question, showed it to Bhagavan for his approval, and sent it off. His remark about this letter must have been his parting message to me, as it turned out that this was to be the last time I ever saw him. Sri Bhagavan also affirmed his universal nature in the following manner in his benedictory verse to Atma Sakshatkar, which he translated into Tamil. Atma Sakshatkar, which was taught by Ishvara to his son Guha, is now propounded in Tamil by that same Lord, the dweller within me, the ancient, the supreme. The power of Bhagwan is eternal and above all siddhis or supernatural powers. A siddhi is transient, but Bhagavan is a healer whose cure is permanent. He kindles aspiration in the heart of those who come to him oblivious of their eternal nature, turns their mind inward with the inquiry, "Who am I?" and helps them to realize the self for whom the word I stands. The main type of Updesha, instruction, used by Bhagwan was silence, as it was with Dakshinamurti of old. Divine bliss permeated those who sat around him. In this silence, the doubts of his devotees were cleared and their questions were either answered or faded away, ceasing to exist. This silence was and is a dynamic force, eternal and universal in nature. Nevertheless, though universal, it is centered at the ashram where he lived, at Tiruvannamalai, at Arunachala, the spiritual center of the world. Sri Ramana's grace acts always, but inscrutably, and in diverse ways. We find his gracious and profound utterances in the small volume of his collected works, in collection of his reported sayings, and in books about him. All this is food for the mind. But when the mind is turned inwards by the inquiry, "Who am I?" he is there in the heart, ever watchful, ever helpful. He does not allow the soul to get drowned, but draws it mercifully to its eternal abode. Sometimes he appears in dreams and visions, blessing and encouraging his old devotees and others too, who never saw him in the body. In the marital garland of letters to Sri Arunachala, he wrote, "Mere thought of thee has drawn me to thee, O Arunachala." Alluding to this once, I said, "Bhagavan, the thought of Arunachala drew you here, but is it not still more wonderful that you drew us here and lopped off our egos?" His answer was his usual gracious and benign smile. Sri Ramana is an ocean of nectar, teeming with kindness. He is gracious and forgiving. Were he to dwell on our faults, we would be lost. But ignoring them, he still guides us. He instills hope when we are dejected, and a supporting hand to lead us towards the goal. The only things required of us are perseverance, and faith in him. Ramana Satguru. 2. S. Cohen. Sri Ramana Jayanti has come again, bringing cheer to thousands of Bhagwan's devotees, old and new, far and near. On this day they call to mind all he has done for them, all he is to them, and how he has influenced their lives. Old devotees who had the rare privilege of a long stay in his physical presence, and their number is diminishing year by year, feel that since leaving the body he has not ceased to work the wonderful transformation in them that he began in life. Newcomers also feel his powerful support in their sadhana. When Bhagwan used to say that the Guru is not the body, many failed to grasp his meaning. But as time passed and he continued to show them his grace and support in their meditation, the significance of these words gradually became clear, so that they eventually ceased to think of him as a person with a body to reminisce about. In this connection, the Bhagavata gives an apt illustration of the revelation of disciple to Guru in the story of Sri Krishna and Uddhava. When Sri Krishna ended his mission on earth and was preparing to return to Vaikuntha, his eternal abode, Uddhav, who was greatly attached to his person, appealed to him with tears in his eyes to take him along with him, saying, "I have strong forebodings, O Supreme Yogi, that after destroying the Yadava race, you will leave the earth altogether. I cannot bear to be away from your feet even for a moment. Grant that I may be taken with you to your divine abode. How can I now be separated from you?" Krishna answered that it would be in Uddhav's own interest not to cling to Krishna's body, but to stay on after him and practice yoga in the Himalayas. After shaking off all attachments to your family and kinsfolk, keeping your mind fixed wholly on me. You must always remember, friend Uddhava, he continued, that whatever is thought by the mind, perceived by the eye and ear, and spoken by the tongue, is a creation of the mind and therefore illusory. By controlling your mind and senses, you will see the world in your own self and yourself in me, the Supreme Lord. Possessed of this knowledge and immersed in the contentment of self-realization, you will experience no obstruction in life. Sri Bhagavan knew, like Sri Krishna, that nothing is more productive of the highest spiritual results than concentration of the mind on one's real nature, which is the absolute reality, the Lord Himself, the Supreme Guru. Attachment to and service to the outer Guru in the form of the Master takes only a secondary place. The following incident, which occurred in my presence, shows how Bhagwan graded meditation higher than service. Once the devotee who was in charge of English correspondence in the ashram office was unavailable, and the Sarvadhikari asked Major Chadwick, who was then living in the ashram, to take his place. Chadwick refused, but felt a prick of conscience for doing so. After dinner that night, when we were alone or almost alone with Bhagwan, I do not exactly remember after these 27 or 28 years, Chadwick told him about it and asked whether he had done right. Bhagwan answered that Chadwick was doing him greater service by meditating, thereby greatly relieving the latter's mind. Bhagwan was often asked about the necessity of a guru for the attainment of liberation, and used to answer that the guru was necessary. And indeed, mere study of the Upanishads is unlikely to lead very far, whereas association with the sage and absorption of his instruction, based on his own experience, may quickly bring about the requisite comprehension, leading towards liberation. No doubt, some sages, like Bhagavan, have attained the goal without a guru in human form, but these were rare beings who had already in their past lives brought their sadhana so far that only a little further effort was needed. There is no need to go into the detail about Bhagwan's teaching. It is simple, orthodox Advaita Vedanta, as taught in the Upanishads, the Gita, the Bhagavata, and the writings of Shankara, Vidyaranya, Gaudapada, and others. We find in it complete consistency in listening, Jagrat, the waking state, to Swapna, the dream state. Both are changeable and impermanent, so that when one is on, the other is off, whereas he who dreams and wakes is the same person, present in both. There is a traditional story that illustrates this. Once a king dreamt that he was a young man of the name of Chandu, owning a prosperous grocery. One day, Panji, a beautiful outcast girl, came half-drunk to buy betel nuts from him. She roused his passion by her seductive demeanor, or misdemeanor, to such an extent that he decided to marry her, even though it would mean loss of caste for him. When she became his wife, Panji turned out to be very vicious, but Chandu overlooked all her faults owing to his infatuation for her. Her wants proved insatiable, ruining his business and driving him to take up work reserved for outcasts. This went on for 20 years, during which time he had 3 children by Panji, of whom the eldest, a boy, grew to be even more wicked than his mother. With his increased family, Chandu had to take to dishonest means of livelihood to add to his income, and he suffered the consequences. He sank lower and lower till one day his son, in a fit of rage, hanged himself. The king's officers, suspecting Chandu of being the murderer, took him to prison and beat him mercilessly. He cried out so loud that, let us not forget that he was a king in his waking state. It woke his queen, who was sleeping nearby. She got up and shook him and woke him too, thereby ending the ordeal of the dream Chandu. The king was so much shaken by his dream ordeal that he shut himself up in his apartments for several days and did not resume his royal duties till he had committed the whole experience to paper. His minister made it into a book under the title The Autobiography of Chandu. How, I ask, does this autobiography differ from those pertaining to and written in the waking state? His 20 years of suffering were real to Chandu, as also was his infatuation for Panji, his criminal life, and the beating he received in prison. If you argue that the whole story was concocted in the king's own mind, so also were all his waking experiences, like those of all of us. Dreams also have their time in space and natural laws, just as the waking state has. As for Chandu, he is the experiencer of the 3 states. In the waking state, he is a king. In the dream state, a merchant who becomes an outcast, while in the deep sleep state he plays no role, but is still himself. Whereas the states come and go, their experiencer is always the same. It is said that he who understands the 10 verses of the Mandukya Upanishad has no need to study the other Upanishads, because they show the world to be a state of the mind, just like the other 2 states, and also because what it leaves unsaid but inferred is as important as what it says. From its representing the 3 states as the only states through which the jiva passes in its apparent peregrination, we have to conclude that death introduces no new state for the ordinary man, but only retains what he now experiences, namely, the conditions of dream and sleep, or an alteration of the 2. Till rebirth in a new body takes place and restores the waking state also. The same applies to loss of consciousness due to drugs, anesthetics, fainting fits, or the laya of Hatha Yoga. misnamed Samadhi. But the sage is above all three states, both in this life and after death, being established permanently in Turiya, the fourth state, which is pure consciousness, the nature of the self, and from which there is no return to a body. He has freed himself from the pangs of birth and death forever. Such a one was Bhagwan Sri Ramana. A conversation. Devotee. The Buddhists deny the world, whereas Hindu philosophy admits its existence but calls it unreal. Isn't that so? Bhagavan. It is only a difference of point of view. Devotee. They say that the world is created by divine energy, Shakti. Is the knowledge of unreality due to the veiling of illusion, Maya? Bhagavan. All admit creation by the divine energy. But what is the nature of this energy? It must be in conformity with the nature of its creation. Devotee. Are there degrees of illusion? Bhagavan. Illusion itself is illusory. It must be seen by somebody outside it. But how can such a seer be subject to it? So how can he speak of degrees of it? You see various scenes passing on a cinema screen. Fire seems to burn buildings to ashes. Water seems to wreck ships. But the screen on which the pictures are projected remains unburnt and dry. Why? Because the pictures are unreal and the screen real. Similarly, reflections pass through a mirror, but it is not affected at all by their number or quality. In the same way, the world is a phenomena upon the substratum of the single reality, which is not affected by it in any way. Reality is only one. Talk of illusion is due only to the point of view. Change your viewpoint to that of knowledge, and you will perceive the universe to be only Brahman. Being now immersed in the world, you see it as a real world. Get beyond it, and it will disappear, and reality alone will remain. The Maharshi was asked by someone whether the belief in the necessity of a guru is correct. He gave the following reply. So long as one thinks of himself as little, Laghu, he must take hold of the great Guru. He must not, however, look upon the Guru as a person. The sage is none other than the real self of the disciple. When the self is realized, then there is neither Guru nor disciple. The question arose because the sage himself had had no Guru, at least no outer Guru. On another occasion, the sage said, a teacher would be needed if one had to learn something new. But this is a case of unlearning.